A few weeks back, I was talking to Leah Rowe, the core developer of Libreboot, and she sent me a blog post about a special Libreboot release, Censored Libreboot, asking me if I wanted to do a video on it. Now, I briefly read it at the time, but I didn't really know the full context and didn't really feel like doing that video. Since then, the situation has evolved a little, and nobody is talking about this, but cease and desist letters have been sent out, and you guys need to know about it. For context, Libreboot is a free software replacement for your standard BIOS firmware, based on another project called Core Boot. Now, it's not really a fork of Core Boot, it's better to think of it like a Core Boot distribution. Now, Core Boot is going to happily make use of binary blobs to ensure your hardware is functioning. Traditionally, Libreboot was not like that. Traditionally, Libreboot was basically Core Boot minus the binary blobs, following a system known as the Free System Distribution Guidelines, or GNU FSDG. The TLDR is what you would generally expect from GNU and the FSF. If it is a proprietary binary blob, delete it. It doesn't matter if it breaks hardware functionality, it doesn't matter if it's required to make the computer function, it should not exist, and something else should be used instead. Let's not talk about the proprietary software baked directly into the hardware that the FSF doesn't really care about, because that's really inconvenient. The major problem with the GNU FSDG is there is hardware that simply cannot be supported. There is no open solution, your only option is using the binary blob. So since then, Libreboot has migrated over to another strategy. Now it follows a policy called binary blob reduction. In a perfect world, you could completely eliminate proprietary software, but I don't know how to get to that world, and you probably don't know either. So the goal here is to minimize the amount of proprietary software, but don't do so at the detriment of the user. If the hardware works perfectly well with a free solution, use that instead. But if the only option is proprietary, or the only option that is functional is proprietary, that's fine to use instead. Because at the end of the day, using Libreboot is considerably more free than any standard BIOS with your hardware. As such, while there is the option to get rid of them, CPU microcode updates are going to be included by default, because whilst they are proprietary, having a broken CPU is a lot worse than a CPU that already has proprietary code baked in, running a little bit more proprietary code. However, user choice should also be encouraged. If you want to go and eliminate all of the binary blobs and just use the free solutions, you should be allowed to do that. It is your system. Libreboot should just be empowering the user to run their system as they want to run it. The policy page goes into great detail about why this change was made, the benefits of this change, all of the individual things that can be and can't be included because of this change, and I highly recommend you go and read it. Now, to illustrate the value of this change, Leah made Censored Libreboot. This is what would happen if they got rid of the binary blob reduction policy and went back towards the GNU FSDG policy. This basically breaks Libreboot in its current state, and a lot of boards that people want to be using do not work. Like, all of these ThinkPads stop working. TLDR, yes, I made this special release of Libreboot specifically so that I could crap all over it. Any project that tries, whether or not they succeed, to replicate the old Libreboot project as illustrated by this special release of Libreboot are doing themselves and their users a major disservice by providing completely inferior firmware and mostly on very outdated hardware that normal people don't want to use. Ideological purity is all well and good, but you have to meet people where they're at. If someone approaches you with hardware that can have certain proprietary code replaced, thus increasing software freedoms, they should be accommodated, and Libreboot's mission is to do exactly that. We believe passionately in free software and want everyone to use it. Shifting that into a whole different space, think about the M1 and M2 Macs. Sure, you could say, this system is never going to be completely free software, there is always going to be certain aspects that are a little bit weird. But isn't it better to have a system which has a lot more free software than just running macOS? How you feel about that is going to depend on how you feel about free software, but personally, I agree with Leah. Now, when Leah says, Any project that tries, whether or not they succeed, this is not just a theoretical. There is a specific project she is referring to. GNU Boot. Going back to March of 2023, once again, LibrePlanet occurred. This is basically the FSF's conference about free software and free software things. A bunch of talks happened at this event, one of them by Sick Codes. Go watch my podcast with him, but the one that we want to talk about is by a guy called Desist, GNU to, correctly, I'm going to say, taking control over the means of production, free software boot. A fork of LibreBoot was announced. I'll leave the talk in the description down below if you want to go and watch it for yourself. I highly recommend you do so. This is the website libreboot.at, and this is the Savannah repo. Now, when this project was first announced, they were trying to steal the name LibreBoot. It's not until way later, after getting called out by Leah, they decided to rename the project to GNU Boot. And that's going to be a very, very important detail. This project, described in the simplest way, is a hostile fork of LibreBoot. In order to achieve our goal, it is crucial that we call a program free or libre only when it is indeed free in its entirety. I've gone into plenty of reasons why even the Free Software Foundation completely breaks that rule. When we talk about specific programs, we must not muddle the facts about what is free and what is not. If people start referring to a program as Libre when parts of it are not in fact Libre, that tends to lead the community astray. Unfortunately, such a muddle happened last year with a boot program that was free software and was called LibreBoot. The development team added non-free code to it, but continued to refer to it misleadingly as LibreBoot. LibreBoot was first released in 2013. It has been widely recommended in the free software community for the last 9 years. In November 2022, LibreBoot began to include non-Libre code. We have made repeated efforts to continue collaboration with those developers to help their version of LibreBoot remain Libre, but that was not successful. So recently, Leah wrote about GNU Boot over on the LibreBoot website. The most remarkable thing of all is this. In December 22 is when I first learned about their supposed effort. They tried to poach several LibreBoot developers behind my back, but none of them were interested, it seems, and one of them leaked the existence of their effort to me. I knew 3 months before they announced that they were going to announce something, and I reliably predicted it to be at LibrePlanet. The most absurd thing of that is, why did they not contact me? The GNU people should have simply contacted me from the start. I would have helped them. I did LibreBoot releases under their policies for years, and I know what I'm doing. Ideology aside, I enjoy fun technical challenges, I have a wide depth of knowledge and expertise, and I offer it now, as I have today, and I'll continue to do so. I offer my support in service to it, even if I would personally never use nor recommend their project. One of the purposes of today's article is simply to tell people they exist because I hope maybe they'll get more devs. They use the same build system as LibreBoot, so LibreBoot could even merge a lot of their actual code / ideas that they produce. And they can merge our work, and I want them to do that. There were / are more things to talk about, but I'm not really interested in writing more. Free as in freedom, LibreBoot is a free software project, yet GNU propaganda says otherwise. As is often the case with a hostile fork, this one is horribly maintained. The website is based on a really old version. So, going to the download section, it says LibreBoot 2021 11/22. Now, LibreBoot version numbers are done based on the date. So this is the 22nd of November 2021. The website is like 16, 17 months old. Now that would be fine if the source code was up to date. The problem is it's based on an 8-month-old build of LibreBoot. And while some development is being done, there is 1, 2, 3 developers. And this is everything they have done. That is all. So you have to recover 8 months worth of work with basically no developers on a volunteer project. This project is basically vaporware. Let's not forget the last 8 months of work had a lot of work being done, more than is normal, and took some absolutely massive leaps. Now for the memes, maybe to be helpful, I don't really know, Leah decided to make a sort of joke release. she made a project called Non-Genuine Boot, originally just called Unofficial GNU Boot. This is a version of LibreBoot based on a modern version of the project with all of the binary blobs stripped out that exist solely for the purpose of letting GNU Boot rebase to this version to be on a newer version of LibreBoot. All they would have to do is pull the code in, and suddenly their project is not completely worthless. Because if you're going to fork a project, actually fork the project. Don't fork it into a completely useless state and then start saying you've actually made something where it's just going to harm the users. This was released on July 17th, and certain news outlets didn't exactly get the memo that this is not really GNU Boot. GNU Boot is the thing that GNU is doing. So Phoronix actually made an article saying that Leah is the developer of GNU Boot, because they thought this was the actual project. Now remember the cease and desist I mentioned? Well, here's an update from July 21st. The GNU Boot people actually sent me a cease and desist email citing trademark infringement. Amazing. Despite the original site clearly stating that it's unofficial, I literally made it to help them, to help them use newer LibreBoot because they use old LibreBoot and even older core boot. Now, to be fair, even if you do call it unofficial, you are still using their trademark, so I can understand why they sent the email. The problem is the project that they made, they literally tried to call it LibreBoot. So they called a project LibreBoot, then renamed it to GNU Boot. When the original LibreBoot makes a project called GNU Boot, you then send their GNU Boot a cease and desist. So does that mean Leah should have sent a cease and desist to the GNU Boot guys because they were using the LibreBoot name? I guess so. I guess that's what they're encouraging. Anyway, here's the email. Just in case, a little reminder, you're not the maintainer of GNU Boot and you can't publish releases on our behalf. Doing so, you're impersonating us and infringing the GNU trademark. Please stop now. If you want to contribute, you're welcome to send us patches that we will review if we want to. I think the best part about Leah's rename is previously the subdomain was GNU Boot. Now it is not GNU Boot, because that is 100% a completely different thing. This is such a dumb situation that never had to escalate to legal threats. All that had to happen is people talking to each other, and clearly Leah is willing to help out this project. Talk to Leah and get her to help. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Do you think the situation was dumb? Do you think it played out exactly how you'd expect? I would love to know. So if you like the video, go like the video. And if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe to the LibrePay link in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and GNU L.